According to media reports, the Russian intelligence agency FSB has uncovered a plot to take control of the Russian military by a group of plotters with obviously the potential to later take control over the whole state itself. This and more, and the developments on the front lines in the war in Ukraine in this situation report. Lukashenko, the Belarusian president, has said in an interview that Belarus will only join the war if Ukraine is attacking Belarus. That obviously allows for false flag attacks, but at least as of now, there is no inclination of, there is no expressed interest by Belarus to join the war and by Lukashenko. He, in the same interview, he also said that he would offer again Belarusian territory for attacks on Russia, though. Over Kiev, the Ukrainians have shot down several balloons as well. Like, everyone is shooting down balloons right now. They think they are Russians, and they are not sure, though. At least what I read at the moment, the latest news I had about those balloons were they weren't sure if those balloons were meant for the Ukrainians to expend air defense missiles that are scarce, or if they actually had some sensors on top, so they didn't have much of a choice to shoot them down regardless. On the 16th of February, there was another air attack, a big air attack. 32 cruise missiles were used, 12 KH-101 and KH-555, 12 KH-22, 8 caliber, and 2 KH-59 were used. Ukraine is saying they shot down 16 of those, so more or less 50%, which means half of them got through, the air defense, the efficiency has at least dropped in this regard in comparison to past intercepts. According to the British Ministry of Defense, the Russians have now suffered 175 to 200,000 men in losses when it comes to both the military and the PMCs. Among those are 40 to 60,000 fallen. Since September 2022, according to the British, the loss rate has massively increased. That's coinciding with the mobilization, which would mean that at that point a lot of additional soldiers, not only were additional soldiers sent, but also soldiers which were less well trained. The British Ministry of Defense is saying the death ratio is surprisingly and untypically high, which they attribute to as a sign of bad medical care. So once the Russian soldiers are wounded, they are not getting the same medical care as in other militaries, which means more than usual are dying. Artillery, they identify as the cause for the majority of the losses, and they are also saying that Wagner has had losses of 50% as of now. Medusa, on the other hand, which is a opposition media, is saying Wagner alone has suffered 32,000 men losses in fallen and missing. So basically, Wagner is not far from being wiped out if we believe Medusa, as it would, as you would expect, a higher number in wounded. But yeah. Those are the numbers Medusa is giving us. Ukraine is believing that Russia intends to conquer Bakhmut to the 24th when the war began. The second phase of the Russo-Ukrainian war began a year ago, and that they will more or less celebrate the event with a massive air attack that they expect to happen on the 24th of February. On the Eastern Front, north of the Seversky Donetsk, there are further Russian advances. The Russians are saying along the Oskil they advanced, which is here. They advance further south. We have proof now that the Ukrainians have lost Ryan-Kivka and Liman-Pershi, which are here, and that the Russians have crept closer towards Nikivka, but it's still in Ukrainian hands. The Russians are claiming successes close to Ploshchanka, which is here. I cannot confirm this. They're also claiming that they have advanced 2 to 3 kilometers close to Dibrova, which is here. So that should be this spike towards the region of Torske and where is it? It somehow jumped because I dared use the button. Towards in the Sarishne and Torske, towards the region of Sarishne and Torske. South of the Seversky Donetsk, we have reports about massive attacks on Bilohorivka, but Bilohorivka is still in Ukrainian hands, or at least the majority of it. Also, Russian attacks are reported in the direction of Fedorivka. That's the aim, basically, to advance towards Siversk. At least it seems to that. Should the Russians reach Siversk, then obviously the Ukrainian line all east of it would more or less collapse. The Ukrainian would have to withdraw along the Siversky Donets to a line further west of Siversk. While the attack towards Fedorivka seems to have been without success, the attacks on Paraskovivka have been successful. This is right next to Krasna Hora. We have image proof of Wagner flag being shown at the center of Paraskovivka. And this is another region where the E40 is being reached. The Riba here, the pro-Russian channel Riba, is saying they've reached the E40 and are blocking it as of now, but the same channel was spreading this map here, which shows the lines of communication around Bakhmut, which is here. And you see green means the Ukrainians still can supply themselves over this line of communication. Purple means it's under fire control by the Russians, and red means it's blocked. So you see this is the blocked part here, where the Russians control the road. This here is Krasna Hora, so the map is not completely correct, completely updated. The Russian line is now more or less here, but that shows that these lines of communication are still for use of the Ukrainian military. They can still supply Bakhmut fairly well over those lines of communication. It's even better. The situation has improved a little for the Ukrainians as they have made a counterattack at the TO405 close to Ivanivske and have thrown back the Russians in those hills quite a significant part. That this means they can fully reutilize the road here is not really sure, because the area here at least is flat, and I'm not completely sure where on those hills the last Russian positions are. So, but as said, like in overall, even if this area cannot be used, it means that the pressure on towards Chasiv Yar is reduced, and that the Ukrainians can still use all those lines of communication further north. Further south, we have reports about Russian successful attacks here in Novobakhmutivka. There's a geolocation for a video which unfortunately I can't show you because of images that are visible in this. And there are also Russian successes being confirmed in the direction of Pervomaiske. Slow progress, but the Russians are progressing. Russian military bloggers are saying that the Russians are no longer trying to conquer Marinka in total, but that they are advancing north and south of the town. And at least in this pro-Ukrainian map, it seems to indicate that this is actually happening. The basic goal would be to avoid the costly house-to-house combat in the western part of Marinka and simply threaten them with encirclement to force the Ukrainians to withdraw. Further south, attacks on Vuhledar continue. We have a video here of a attack with TOS-1 thermobaric weapons. You can even see the missiles fly in and the typical explosion from a thermobaric weapon. It's being used here in the outskirts of Vuhledar, from what I understand, where it was located. And it's the TOS-1 launchers are not in local command, so it's a higher than brigade level, like army command, that has them disposable, which shows the higher command structure putting a focus on Vuhledar right now by deploying those frightening missile launchers towards Vuhledar to use them against the Ukrainians there. Also, there are reports about attacks in the direction of Prechystivka and Novosilka, both still within Oblast of Donetsk, showing the Russian attempts to push the Ukrainians further back here and secure Donetsk for them. On the southern front, along Zaporizhzhia, we only have the report that supposedly right now there are some buses on the way with Wagner fighters being redeployed to Zaporizhzhia. It's pure speculation, but they could be used for a diversion attack when the full offensive is starting off here. At least that would be an option. On the Dnipro, we have the usual reports about commando raids from both sides reporting defeating the enemy, repulsing it, destroying something from the enemy. Some boats were destroyed, civilian boats and so on, but basically nothing changed along the front line here. Artillery fire obviously is still happening here, and it's happening from both sides, and it's happening along the whole front line. Generally, according to satellite pictures, we can say Russia has increased the number of airplanes close to the combat area massively. Obviously, this time the Russians want to focus more on their air force when it comes to the support of a Russian offensive. The Russian rocket missile attacks, the Russian missile attacks in the rear areas of Ukraine have helped to disperse the Russian air defense, which means it's less concentrated along the front line, which should mitigate the effect of it and reduce Russian losses. Also, there are more pictures of anti-radar missiles being deployed on Russian fighter jets, so it seems increasingly Russia is attempting a SEAD campaign, suppression of enemy air defenses, to suppress Ukrainians' air defenses and thus allow them to utilize their air force more in a coming offensive, as at least 80% of the Russian air force is still completely unscratched. So it's the one part of the Russian armed forces that is more or less close to full strength that can actually be deployed in support of the Russian advances on the ground, of Russian offensives, as obviously the Navy has suffered some losses in the Black Sea, but the overall Russian Navy is still big enough, but it's spread somewhere else around the world, and in the Black Sea it can't really support Russian advances on the ground. So what was left was the air force, and it seems we get indications that the Russians will step up their ground attacks in a coming offensive. When it comes to the Crimea, we have Russian reports that they shot down a couple of Ukrainian drones, and there was a big explosion in Armyansk. But it's unclear if that was actually a Ukrainian attack, because the Russians themselves said they did some exercising there. So at least that explosion could be a reason for that. We can't confirm anything further than that. When it comes to the mobilization, the head of Kuznetsk in Penza Oblast, Sergei Slatogorsky, was recommending to send 256 unemployed persons to the military, and he actually proposed changing the law that would force unemployed Russians to join the military. We would see here another step towards total war that is being done by the Russians towards mobilization. Obviously, it's just some local head that is proposing it, but it might be an indication of what can happen in the future. The Russian human rights organization Rus Sidyashchaya said the Russian military is now recruiting prisoners themselves, but they are not doing it on a voluntary basis. They're just going through the files, and whoever is in prison and has military background is being called up, is being pulled in the military. So they're no longer volunteers. And obviously the question is whether they get a pardon afterward is a different question as well. Wagner soldiers have published a video where they are complaining that they don't receive artillery ammunition. Prigozhin confirmed that and said he had to basically ask personally in Moscow to get them ammunition. It seems likely that the Ministry of Defense wants to weaken Wagner and reduce its profile, its profile in the whole war. The reason for that we will see in a little bit as well. And on the 17th of February, the first video was on the 16th. On the 17th, the Wagner mercenaries made a video in a morgue showing lots of corpses, and they were complaining that they are suffering hundreds of losses per day. And the reason for that is that the Russian military is not supplying them with the necessary supplies, including weapons, ammunition, and protective gear. All of this shows that that Prigozhin tries to do like a PR campaign. At least that would be an interpretation of it, as his star is no longer rising but declining, and now the military has stopped him from recruiting additional prisoners in war. So his position is weakening by the day, and he apparently tries to create a PR campaign with the aid of nationalist bloggers to help him keep his position in this regard, as obviously those videos were spread around by the military bloggers, while at the same time Wagner flags are appearing everywhere. The Russians have advanced around Bakhmut to make the impression that it's Wagner who is actually achieving anything there, and then combine this with the accusation that the Russian military is no longer supporting Wagner to a necessary degree. In the political sphere, we have an article here from the Yale School of Public Health Humanitarian Research Lab. According to that, there are 43 installations that were identified where at least 6,000 Ukrainian children are. The majority of those installations are concentrating on re-education, on indoctrination, and the rest is meant to get the Ukrainian children free for adoption into Russia. Several of those camps have shown that they prevented Ukrainian children to return home. That's what the Yale School of Public Health Humanitarian Research Lab is saying in this report, as you can see here. And you can pause the video to basically read the article for yourself. According to the Ukrainian Resistance Center, the Russians are also actively looking for, let me scroll this up, actively looking for Ukrainian parents that did not send their kids to school and or that have their kids being homeschooled via the internet from Ukrainian schools, basically to avoid that indoctrination. Those parents are being fined and punished in this regard, as the Russians want to get every Ukrainian children into their own schools. In television, on a television interview, the Russian president himself said with the Maria Lvova something, she's like the head of the Human Rights Council, I think. She herself confirmed that she adopted a child from Mariupol. It shows that Putin is fully aware of what is happening. They also mentioned that difficult children are being sent to Kadyrov, to Chechnya, to be taken care of there. So the genocide that aims at basically Russifying Ukrainian children is being confirmed by the Russian president himself, that he's full aware of that. That might be one of the reasons that the American Vice President Kamala Harris has just said in the Munich Security Conference that the US identify Russian crimes against humanity being perpetrated. And this is insofar it is important as crimes against humanity were part of the accusations that were used against German personnel after World War II in the Nuremberg trials, for which they were executed. So the prosecution accused them of crimes against humanity, and once they were sentenced for it, they were executed. Now the same thing that led in other wars before for having military personnel and political personnel getting executed is now being Russia is now being accused of that as well, which obviously gives some historic preference to what theoretically might be awaiting for Russian war criminals. And the big thing you might have all waited for, the Russian FSB apparently uncovered a coup d'etat attempt. Well, you can't fully call it coup d'etat yet, because according to German media, the plans that were done were the reason while Putin reorganized the military, while Surovikin was demoted, while Gerasimov has taken full control now. And the plan was by Kadyrov, Surovikin, and by Prigozhin, they wanted to take over the control of the military. Surovikin was supposed to control the armed forces. Prigozhin was supposed to be the Minister of Defense, replacing Shoigu, and Kadyrov apparently planned to become the head of the National Guard, which should be the Rosgvardia, and the majority of his Chechen Kadyrovtsi are part of the Rosgvardia, so he already has a big foothold in those armed forces. The FSB was aware since October and foiled the plot, but obviously it shown that that the usage for all three of them is still high enough that they didn't fall out of windows, but that they were still kept, but their influence is being reduced. And it was obvious, I reported in the past that there were some documents leaked that supposedly Surovikin was no longer allowed to be mentioned positively, only neutral, that there was Prigozhin and Wagner was not to be mentioned at all anymore. And we probably realized that Kadyrov was no longer appearing in the public for quite some time. All of this seems to be directly connected to that attempt. Obviously, taking over the military would have allowed them later to make an attempt to take over the country itself, but they were stopped before anything like that came even closer. But when we are talking about falling out of the window, the head of the financial department of the Western Military District, Marina Yarinka, fell out of a window on the 16th of February and died. In April 2022, she wrote a report that 70% of the money that were meant to modernize air defense around St. Petersburg was stolen. Now she fell out of a window. Apparently, being higher than ground floor is fairly dangerous in Russia right now. And even though it's cold, all the windows must be wide open, so people fall out of them all the time. Lukashenko said that Belarus has now fulfilled 80% of the 28 union state programs. So among those are the programs for adjustment of taxes and tariffs, which was one of the biggest roadblocks for the union state progress. Belarus has prolonged and postponed and hindered this implementation since 2019, and we can expect, and analysts also say that it is to be expected, that this is the price Lukashenko is paying for not actively participating in the war while staying in power. So Russian pressure is forcing Lukashenko to do this. The union state will be a possibility for Russia to take over control over Belarus in a form of suzerainty, basically not fully annexing it, but taking full control over it. And the whole program started in 1999, then actually with Lukashenko's support, because on the Russian side was the weak Russian President Yeltsin, and he apparently had the idea that with Belarus he could take over Russia, control it from Belarus, but with the change in leadership in Russia, that fastly fell apart, and Belarus had didn't have the guts or didn't see the political means to abolish this attempt for the union state anymore. Since then, Lukashenko is prolonging the process. We're seeing it's for 24 years in progress already. That should have been enough time to allow for its implementation. But right now, the Russian-Ukrainian war is obviously allowing Russia to pressure Belarus to proceed with this progress. In the end, this will obviously mean the end of Belarusian independence and allow Russia to implement Belarus into its empire as well. There was a Russian survey in December, and 52% of the person asked said that they either have a friend or a relative fighting in Ukraine, which shows that the war is getting closer to the Russian population, which will mean that over time the Russian population will no longer be able to ignore its effect as well. And on Twitter, we have an example for the re-education as well. These are supposedly Ukrainian books that are being thrown out of the library in Mariupol. At least that's what's being spread on the internet. A little weird is though that we have some cardboards under it, which would kind of indicate that there seem to be an attempt to save them, especially as those seem to be kind of like organized there, even though those look far less organized and far less clean, and it's still on the outside. So the accusation obviously is that this is part of the Russification progress, where not even universities are being allowed to keep literature that is being deemed un-Russian or pro-Ukrainian in this regard. Again, in the context has to be seen of the Russification, which is a war crime and is being considered as genocide. When it comes to the support, to the international support, Riba is writing Russia has bought 100,000 shells from Iran. Iran has big stocks of 122 shells and Grad rockets that could still be bought, and right now they're negotiating about 152 millimeter grenades. They are also speculating that militias from Iran, Iraq, and Syria could start fighting on the Russian side against, as they call it, the collective West in Ukraine. But that's a pure speculation. As of now, we have not seen any foreign mercenaries in any serious amount actually having arrived within Russia. And in the meeting with the Russian president, the The Belarusian president offered to produce Sukhoi 25 ground attack planes for close air support in Belarus for the Russian armed forces if there's technology transfer happenings to allow the Belarusians to do it. And the state-owned Minsk car factory has also started production of truck parts for the Russian Kamaz company, which produces trucks for the Russian military. So Belarus is getting integrated in the mobilization efforts when it comes to the military-industrial complex of Russia as well in this regard. From the United States, we have this here. The Democrats and Republican lawmakers are urging the US president to allow the transfer of F-16 towards Ukraine. Obviously, this is just demand for it. In the end, it will be US President Biden to decide whether they are being delivered or not, but at least it shows that the political support for this is in existence and it is getting louder. And to finish up, we see a video here where a Russian tank is shooting, and you can see that the blast obviously causes the soldier right next to it to pass out. This shouldn't be much of a surprise who has ever been at a shooting range. Even if somebody is just shooting a 9mm handgun 2 meters to your left or to your right, you feel the blast, and you feel it quite significantly. That 125mm artillery, basically a tank gun, if the blast of it, that it has an effect on the human body, should not be much of a surprise. And we can see this as a sign of bad discipline or of bad training by either by probably both the infantry and the tank, as you should not be there when the tank fires, and the tank should not fire unless obviously it's for its own preservation or something like this. So something like this should not happen, but it shouldn't be much of a surprise as well that shells can have this effect. That's it from me for now. And this channel is only possible because of the support from viewers like you. If you want to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. Thank you very much to everyone already supporting the channel. If you like the video, please hit the thumbs up button and leave a comment what you think about the coup attempt. Did they ever have a chance, or would Russia be better off if they had taken control of the Russian military? Would we already see nuclear war, as both Prigozhin and Kadyrov have toyed with the idea to use nuclear weapons? Leave your comments and start discussions. Not only can it be interesting, but it really helps with the algorithm. And if you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss future videos like this. Thank you for watching. That's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.